Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, it's grey at the moment, but it's going to be really, really nice later on. Well, it's Friday today, so it's going to get nice over the weekend and then really sunny. I'm going to go left here because I am a bit late, as you will notice from the clock. But I'll still be all right. I'll still be there in time for 1:45. Well, you'll be able to. Oh, you can fast forward to the end, can't you, and find out whether I am or not. Well, that's really weird. You know something that I don't know because I've already done it, and yet I haven't actually done it in real life. Hey, take that, Back to the Future. There's a paradox for you. So anyway, I wanted to talk today about an issue. These are always current issues, you know. I mean, they're a bit like prime numbers. You think that you'd run out of them, but in fact, there's an infinite number of them. So, and that is issues in dentistry and with the tension between the NHS provision and private provision in the UK. We have this dichotomy whereby the state collects money off of everybody and uses it or doesn't use it in effect to provide a dental service, and so the dental service in general is very poor, and as a result people opt to just pay for a private dental service. Well, I mean, you know, if I was a bit fed up with the my NHS diabetic nurse, I would have a bit of a problem paying for a private diabetic nurse. I mean, I'm sure I could find one. There are a couple of private hospitals around here who've probably got, you know, endocrinologists who do diabetes care for old duffers like me with not much of a problem but loads of money, but who want like a top level service. And but in dentistry, NHS dentistry and private dentistry is very well established. You know, you can swap between the two. And you know, I'm going to talk today about the swap, the flow, which is not often talked about, which is the flow from private to the NHS. Everybody talks about how they've used to go on the NHS and then they decided that they were going to go privately. I mean, obviously we're talking about certain categories of patients. I mean, I before we get too far into this, let me say I am a big supporter of the National Health Service. I wouldn't work in it personally, but you know, I think that for the grace of God and all that, I pay my national insurance so that if I needed to use it, I could use it. Would I use it? No. But you know, but I accept that for lots of people, it's their only option, and I'm happy to boycott it because it frees up resources for them. They get a much better experience as a result of me not using the service and competing with them with my sharp elbows. So we're all used to people saying, "Oh, the NHS, didn't like the NHS," and so I went private. That's the phrase, boys. So I went private. Here we go. Now, when I qualified in '82, people who went private were people who were like sort of generally in society regarded as generally very wealthy individuals, and they used to go private so that they could boast about it down the golf club on a Saturday or Friday and Saturday and a Sunday usually. And there weren't that many private patients around. And that was because the quality of the National Health Service in general was pretty good. Excuse me. You know, you could get an NHS dentist wherever you wanted. Everybody did NHS, offered NHS. The waiting lists were generally pretty manageable and the quality of the work was good. They had an independent inspectorate. All the work went through the Dental Estimates Board, later the Dental Practice Board. they did a statistical check on everybody. If someone was doing 5 times as many occlusals as everyone else, then they used to send a bloke round and ask him why. Especially if every time he did an occlusal in the filling, he did an occlusal in the filling next door. So, and then on another level, you had local inspection. You had regional dental officers, they were called. And they were just, there was a colleague who was just worked in a practice 10 miles away, and he was in charge of, you would have to produce 2 or 3 sets of notes and the patients to go with them. And he used to come round and have a look and just check and see what he report on the state of the patient's mouths. I mean, it was a very direct and yet just about manageable way of doing it. I mean, you could argue that it's not a very good idea to have a bloke in the local area as the inspector, because obviously he's got an incentive. You could argue that he had an incentive to say that everybody else was rubbish and to get a load of work for his own surgery as a result. But in general, I mean, it worked the other way almost as much, in that you would know them, you'd have met them at the local dental committee meetings, and really they were there only to weed out the really bad eggs. If you were just like a general practitioner doing stuff okay and not taking any liberties, then like claiming every tooth that you took out was a surgical extraction, and that you had to raise a flap and remove bone and suture a packet and everything. Whereas, and they would like, look, well, really, for a lower incisor, really? For a lower incisor, really? That was the dental estimates board job. And then with the new contracts in 92 and 2006, part of the deal was that they abolished all the inspection. So all the regional dental officers went out the window, and they abolished the dental practice board, and there was no centralized reporting of treatments carried out. And that was because really they wanted dentists to stay on the NHS. They needed dentists. They needed some NHS dentists. And so that was the point at which they started turning a blind eye to quality. They didn't want to hear that NHS dentistry was rubbish. And as much as we told them that the changes that they were making were going to lead to a severe downgrade in the quality of NHS dentistry, they just put their fingers in their ears and went la la la. So we went through various stages really with NHS dentistry where it was good, and probably comparable with a lot of private work today. And you could get bridges and chrome dentures and stuff done on the NHS. And then we went through a period when it was sort of substandard. In other words, they were using the cheapest materials and the cheapest acrylics, denture teeth and stuff like that. And then they went through another phase where the quality dropped even further, where, for example, the dentist would take an impression of someone's mouth and send it to a technician and say, just make a denture on this. Don't worry if the bite's not right. Don't worry if it doesn't fit all that well. I'll grind it in when it gets to the patient's mouth. And then they started doing things like, instead of making bridges that attach to the 2 teeth either side, they made bridges that attach to just 1 tooth on one side, because that put the laboratory bill down. And then, and I started seeing all this stuff coming in. I've literally witnessed the downhill, the 45-degree downhill slope that NHS dentistry has been on since 1992. And the mistake I made initially was that there was a line under which the standard couldn't fall. And that was a big mistake. I mean, it was an assumption. It didn't affect anybody, but I just said, no, the dentists were, and I was looking at it through my own lens, these dentists were trained, to a standard which I understood and worked to. And, so they might use a cheap acrylic, or they might use a cheap alloy for the crowns, because no, I mean, no one's going to have a crown taken off and tested for alloy percentage. So as long as it looked right, it would get through the inspection. You know, in other words, that there was no difference really as far as the inspection came between a gold crown and a gold looking crown. You know, the only way you could probably tell would be to subpoena the lab bill, the docket, you know, that specified what standard it was to be made at, and I suppose a lot of those were just shredded straight away. So you know, you've got really substandard treatment, you've got non-standard, substandard clinical treatment, substandard materials, and you've got out and out fraud of the NHS by using materials that are not authorised for use. Then we went through a big phase of getting everything done in North Korea or Australia. There were big labs that shipped everything abroad, and then there was teledentistry, where you used to get your whitening prescribed by someone over the phone or over Zoom or whatever. So there's no end to human ingenuity. I thought, no, look, no dentist is ever going to fill a tooth with bubble gum. That's what it boils down to. Everyone's got a line in the sand. They're going to say, like, okay, I don't mind dropping my standards. And they might argue that they have to drop their standards to continue to pay the bills. But they would say, look, I'm going to drop my standards to help pay the bills. And then they would say, well, I'm going to drop my standards a bit further because I'm not making as much profit as I think I deserve. And who the hell can find out? And then but then they would say, no, but that's it. That's the line at which I'm going to... And if the NHS goes down below that line, if the NHS, you know, working on the NHS requires me to work below my personal line in terms of standards, then I'm just going to go private. Now, how stupid was I? There is no line. There is no line. There, you know, once they started trying to convince women to come back off maternity pay because of the shortage, and once they started working out how they can drop the standards in terms of the degree and open a few dental schools in deprived areas to try and get more sort of cheap dentists onto the market, and their main plank was to try and recruit dentists who were technically able to work in the UK when we were in the EU from places like Romania, then that, you know, this is just one of a long line of wangles. The Department of Health has tried to shore up dentistry. So what I found is that, you know, some patients don't come back to see me. I don't mind that. I mean, I've got enough patients who do want to come and see me to keep me happy. So if a few patients don't want to come back and see me, then that's fine. And if they choose to go to the NHS, then that's fine as well. I mean, I don't know what they think they're getting when they go to the NHS. Well, no, that's not quite true. I think a lot of patients have said to me what they think that they're losing, let's put it this way, if they're not entitled to it. Then a lot of patients have said to me, well, obviously I pay national insurance and I do that in the expectation that I should be able to get my dentistry done on the NHS. And so my problem is that, you know, I can't get in an NHS dentist. But if I could, then I would want to. And then there's the other type of patient who says, I would rather have, if I'm going to need something doing, I'd rather have it done for less money. The bargain hunter, you know. And this is the person who I had, you know, one time I gave someone a quote for a crown. I think it was in the days when crowns were about 400 quid. And she came back and she was highly agitated and said, why Are you charging me £400 for something I could get on the NHS for 60 quid or whatever it was? And of course, in a patient's mind, a crown is a crown is a crown, isn't it? They have to understand and have it explained to them that a private crown is not the same as an NHS crown. You've got more time to do the preparation, use better quality materials, use a better quality laboratory. It looks, an NHS crown looks like Armitage Shanks type porcelain, whereas a private crown would look like a tooth. But you're sometimes on a losing wicket that, because people are like, they're either savvy or they're not. The sort of person who forms a large part of my patients at the moment wouldn't go on the NHS because they understand that there's a tangible difference. But the sort of person that doesn't understand that there's a tangible difference, who thinks that private treatment is NHS treatment only 3 times as expensive, and they're paying for you to be just nice to them and possibly run on time or have apples in the waiting room or something. They think that's the difference. But the dentistry's, which fair enough, it's intangible. They might have a cynical view that you're just profiteering off them due to the lack of NHS availability. So that's why when anyone sort of goes anywhere near that argument, I go out of my way to say, look, I am going to personally find you a list of all the local dentists who say they're accepting NHS. I can't promise that they are, but at least I'll do the legwork for you so that you can try and get what you want. But we've had a couple of patients come back yesterday and the day before from a local NHS dentist, and they're notorious, this NHS dentist. They're notorious for being the only place that is likely to accept you on the NHS, unless you're a child or exempt. And they're also notorious for being the worst dentists. Well, I would say they're the worst dentist I've ever encountered, on the basis of 2 things. One, patient's description of their treatment, and secondly, just looking at the treatment itself. And this was a woman who was had a upper left 3 post crown, which we made, which I think was probably, I don't understand why she had to have it out, but apparently she had to have it out for some reason. So they've taken out this upper left 3 and then not replaced it. So they leave her walking around with a gap where a canine used to be. And she said, when they come back, they always sort of feel, I don't have to, but I mean, sometimes they just feel obliged to make an excuse as to why they left. And so they'll say something like, well, they do evening appointments, and of course that's very convenient for me. I can just go from work and go there at 6 o'clock. But then the problem was that they cancelled that appointment, and then I had to wait 3 months for it, and then they cancelled it, and then come on. No, you're just going to sit there. Monica Electrical, are you? Someone's waiting for you to fix their electrics, and they're sitting there. Anyway, so she's saying, oh well, they're open in the evenings and that, and I'm like, all right, fine. We don't open in the evenings. I can't. Those days when I had 3 dentists and we used to open in the evenings have gone for me. I'm in a different part of my career. But she said, like, no, we had to wait 3 months for an appointment, and then they cancelled it. Then another 2 months, then they cancelled it. Then another 3 months, and then they cancelled it. And she says they're not very nice to you. It's like you're in and out. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. You've realised through experimentation that you don't want to go to an NHS dentist because they take out your front teeth and leave you without a denture. And apparently this place has just had 3 dentists leave, which I'd imagine is why they're cancelling so many appointments. because they just you know, the dentists don't like going there any more than the patients do. So anyway, she came in yesterday, and because we've got a small lab on site and a stock of teeth, we were able to take out our upper left 7 and adjust the denture, you know, put a flange on in the upper left 7 area and add on the upper left 3. And she went away at 4 o'clock, happy as Larry's sister. So don't sweat it. You know, if a patient wants to go on the NHS, just find out which group of patients they are. Are they in the group of patients that would always go on the NHS on the grounds that it's just cheap? Or, you know, as in her case, what happened was that she was like, oh, Mr. Angry, so expensive. And her friend said to her, oh, that's all right. My sister's the practice manager at this NHS practice, and she can wangle you on the waiting list. She can get you on the waiting list. She can sort of get you registered. So they're like, oh, that's great. But that's a lot of value for them, isn't it? To have someone who knows someone who works at an NHS practice who can get them up the top of the queue. I mean, they're no wonder she jumped for it. She just snapped for it like some stupid fish at a worm. And then realised that the NHS hook didn't suit her as well as being tickled in private practice. Right, it's pretty weak pike analogy there at the end, but that's the best I could think of at short notice. Nice to talk to you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.